The Rocky Mountains stretched across Montana like the spine of a giant. In autumn, they wore their most dramatic colors. Forests of pine stood dark and solemn, while streaks of red and gold flared across aspen groves. The air was sharp, the kind that filled the lungs with a chill both invigorating and biting. Winds rolled down the ridges, howling through narrow valleys, and every so often the echo of a falling rock reminded anyone listening that this beauty was never truly safe. On a crisp morning, 8 hikers moved along a narrow trail cut in the mountainside. Their boots crunched on loose gravel, their breath rising in faint white clouds. They were friends, co-workers, and weekend adventurers, bound by the idea of conquering a trail that promised both challenge and reward. Jason, tall and broad-shouldered, led the group. He carried himself with the confidence of someone who had studied the map, checked the weather, and convinced everyone that this trip would be worth the effort. Close behind him walked Sophie, always quick with a joke, her cheerful voice bouncing against the trees. Chris, the youngest at barely 20, trailed at the back, earbuds dangling from his neck, still learning to find his rhythm in the wild. Nora, quiet but alert, kept her eyes scanning the cliffs above them and the shifting rocks below, as if she alone felt how fragile the trail could be. The others, Ethan, Olivia, Liam, and David, made up the heart of the group, carrying backpacks heavy with gear and expectations. To them, the mountain was a playground. The laughter that drifted up the slope sounded almost too light for a place so ancient and unforgiving. For a while the trail held steady, the sun filtered through gaps in the clouds, scattering gold on the treetops, but deep in the ground, the mountain stirred. It began as a vibration, faint, like a giant clearing its throat. A few pebbles skipped down the slope. Olivia noticed first. "Did you feel that?" she asked, pausing to steady herself. Jason chuckled, brushing it off. "Just the mountain reminding us who's boss," but Nora frowned. Her instincts told us something was wrong. Birds erupted suddenly from the treetops ahead, black shapes, scattering against the pale sky. The ground quivered again, stronger this time. A sound followed, low, rising like thunder that had been trapped under the earth. Then the mountainside gave way, with a roar that drowned every scream. The slope above them collapsed. Rocks the size of fists and cars tore free, crashing down in a cascade of dirt and boulders. The trail vanished under the wave. Trees snapped like twigs, their roots ripped from the soil. Chaos consumed the hikers. Jason shoved Sophie forward, shouting for everyone to run, but the path dissolved under their boots. Dust choked the air, turning daylight into a storm of gray. Chris tripped, tumbling hard as stones battered his legs. Nora grabbed a rock face, her fingernails scraping bloody lines as she held on. Ethan and David were swallowed in the cloud, their cries muffled by the thunder of falling stone. It lasted less than a minute, then silence, thick and suffocating. The trail was unrecognizable, buried under rubble, jagged and unstable. 7 of the hikers lay scattered, bloodied, groaning, half-buried. One of them, Christ, did not move. Miles away, in the shelter of the forest, a German shepherd lifted his head. Atlas, 5 years old, with a coat of black and rust-colored fur. He was a creature caught between 2 worlds once, the loyal companion of a young climber who never returned from the mountains, now a wanderer of ridges and valleys, half wild, half domesticated. Atlas survived by instinct, but never forgot the warmth of human touch. That morning, his ears caught something different, a sound that sliced through the ordinary music of the forest. It was not the cry of elk, nor the chatter of squirrels, nor the whisper of the wind. It was pain, raw, human pain, tangled with fear. His amber eyes narrowed, his muscles tensed. Atlas rose to his feet. He barked once, sharp and commanding, then again, louder, his voice echoing against the granite walls. His paws struck the earth in restless circles. He could smell it now, blood, dirt, desperation carried on the wind. The mountain had shifted, and people were trapped. Atlas didn't hesitate. He bounded through brush and bramble, weaving between trees, tail low, ears forward. Each bark rolled into the valley like a beacon. Somewhere, someone had to hear. Somewhere, someone would answer. But even if no one came, Atlas would not stop, because in his heart, shaped by loyalty, sharpened by loss, he understood one truth. The mountain might be merciless, but he didn't have to be. And so, as the sun dipped behind the ridges and shadows lengthened across the forest floor, a lone dog ran against the silence, carrying with him the only hope the hikers had left. The mountain had spoken. Atlas was its reply. Deep in the forested folds of Montana's Rockies, far from marked trails and tourist paths, stood a cabin of weathered logs. Smoke no longer curled from its chimney. The porch sagged under years of snow and rain. Inside, dust clung to corners, though the tools and weapons on the wall remained in perfect order, as if discipline was the only thing left to hold together. This was where Daniel Cross lived, all perhaps where he hid. 52 years old, his body still carried the build of a soldier. Broad shoulders, sinewed arms, a spine that refused to bend even in solitude. His face bore the map of time and war creases etched by sun. Scars hidden beneath his beard, eyes the color of steel that had seen too much. Once, he had been part of a special forces unit, Afghanistan, Iraq, places that carved men down to their core and left them either legends or ghosts. Daniel had been both. He returned home alive, but not whole. His wife Emily had waited for him through every deployment, only to be taken in a sudden car accident that left him standing in a hospital hallway with no mission, no orders, and no reason to fight. That was nearly a decade ago. Since then, the cabin had been his fortress, his prison, and his confession booth. Most mornings began the same. Daniel rose with the dawn, pulled on boots worn smooth, and split wooden islands. The rhythm of axe against log gave structure to hours otherwise empty. He hunted when he needed meat, fished when the streams thawed, and lived by the seasons. He spoke to no one. Cell towers didn't reach this far, and he preferred it that way. Inside the cabin, a single photograph sat on a rough-hewn table. Emily, smiling with her hair blown wild by wind at a lakeshore. Daniel never touched the frame. He feared if he did, the glass would break, and with it the last piece of her he carried. In the evenings, he sometimes turned on an old military radio. Static usually filled the airwaves, but on rare nights he caught faint voices, rangers' coordinated fire watches, truckers calling each other across long highways. Once even a preacher reading verses into the dark. Daniel never replied. Listening was enough. Talking felt like betrayal to Emily, to his fallen brothers, maybe to himself. The forest suited him. Trees didn't ask questions. Rivers didn't care about medals or regrets. The mountains had room for broken men, but peace in the wilderness was fragile. And on that day, as he cleaned a rifle at his workbench, it fractured with a sound he hadn't heard in years. Barking, not the distant yip of coyotes or the occasional farm dog echoing from the valley. This bark was closer, strong, urgent. Again and again it cut through the trees, a rhythm of desperation that made the hairs rise on the back of his neck. Daniel froze, hands resting on the rifle's barrel. The forest had taught him to recognize patterns. The warning cries of birds, the snap of branches under elk hooves, the silence before a storm. But this was different. He stepped onto the porch, scanning the tree line. The dog barked again. Somewhere downhill, a pause, then another bark, sharper, as if calling not just to be heard, but to be followed. Daniel muttered under her breath, "Damn fool animal." He should have gone back inside. He told himself as much. The mountain wasn't his concern anymore. People weren't his concern anymore. He had built his life on that rule: stay out of the world, and the world would stay out of him. But the barking wouldn't stop. It came in bursts, insistent, carrying a tone he couldn't ignore. Daniel had heard voices like that before, not canine, but human. The way men cried out on battlefields when they needed backup. The way Emily had called his name after nightmares when she couldn't wake alone. The sound pressed against him until the walls of the cabin felt smaller than ever. His chest tightened. His pulse, slow, for years, quickened. "Damn it," he said again, this time with the edge of surrender. He strapped a knife to his belt, slung a pack with basic supplies, and set out toward the noise. His boots found the trail, instinctively, each step heavier than the last, as if he were walking out of his own exile. The forest thickened quickly. Branches clawed at his jacket, roots twisted beneath his feet. But the barking guided him like a beacon. Each echo pulled him deeper into the wilderness, farther from the safety of his walls. After 20 minutes, he saw movement ahead, a flash of black and tan fur darting between the trees. The German shepherd skidded to a stop, ears pricked, amber eyes locking on his. They stared at each other across a few yards of tangled brush. Daniel lifted a hand instinctively, palm open, cautious. The dog didn't retreat. Instead, it barked once, commanding, then turned and bolted down the slope. A few seconds later, stopped, looked back at him, and barked again. Daniel exhaled slowly. So that's how it's gonna be. He followed. With every step, the barks grew faster, as if the dog sensed the urgency of time slipping away. Daniel's soldier instincts stirred, the part of him that had lain dormant for years. He didn't know what weighted down that slope, but the mountain silence felt heavier now, as if holding its breath. Something was wrong. He could feel it. And for the first time in a long while, Daniel Cross was moving toward it, instead of away. The dog didn't wait. The moment Daniel took a step forward, it bounded ahead, weaving through fallen logs and thorny undergrowth with the confidence of a creature that belonged to this land. Every dozen yards it stopped, looked back and barked, insistent, then turned to lead again. Daniel's boots sank into the damp earth as he followed. The slope was steep, littered with loose stone. Each step carried the weight of a decision he still wasn't sure about. He muttered under his breath, as if to himself, I must be out of my damn mind. But the barking wouldn't let him turn back. The force thickened, tall pines swallowing the late afternoon light. The air grew colder, thinner. The smell of wet moss mixed with the metallic scent of stone that had recently broken loose. His senses sharpened the way they once did on patrol. When every sound and shadow mattered, it felt unnatural after years of forcing himself into numbness. The dog Atlas, though Daniel didn't yet know his name, darted left. Down a narrow ravine where rocks had tumbled into chaos, Daniel crouched low, scanning. He saw it now, a fresh scar on the mountain's skin. A landslide, maybe only hours old. Soil torn roar. Trees splintered, boulders the size of trucks scattered in a violent trail. Atlas barked at the edge of the debris field, tail rigid, ears forward. Then, the sound cut through the wind, a faint cry. Human, weak. Daniel froze. Breath catching. It came again, muffled but unmistakable. Help. His jaw clenched. For a moment, memories slammed into him. Men screaming across radios. Comrades pinned under collapsed walls, overseas. Emily's voice echoing in a hospital room he never left soon enough. His instinct was to shut it out. Turn away. Bury the noise. But the dog barked again. Sharp and accusing, as if telling him there was no time for ghosts. Daniel's eyes narrowed. His soldier's mind snapped back into function. He moved quickly but carefully down the slope, boots grinding into loose shale, hands steady against the trunks of leaning pines. When he reached Atlas, he saw them, figures caught in the wreckage. 8 climbers, their bright jackets dulled by dust and dirt, scattered in broken positions across the debris field. Some moved weakly, others lay frighteningly stilled. One young man sat pinned waist down under a slab of rock, teeth clenched against pain. A woman clutched her arm bent at an unnatural angle. Another lay unconscious, chest barely rising. The sight struck Daniel like a blow. He had spent years trying to escape the battlefield, and now one had found him again, hidden not in deserts or cities, but here in the wilderness he thought was safe. Atlas wind low, pacing beside him, eyes locked on the survivors. Daniel forced himself to breathe, assess, prioritize. That was the training. He scanned the group, counting, measuring injuries with the precision of someone who had done it too many times before. 8, he muttered. Jesus. One of the climbers noticed him and lifted a trembling hand. Please help us. Daniel crouched beside him. The man's face was pale, streaked with dirt and blood. His name tag, torn from a backpack, read Jason. Daniel pressed 2 fingers to his neck, pulse rapid but strong. You're not alone anymore, Daniel said, his voice calm, steady in a way that surprised even him. I've got you. Jason's eyes welled with tears, relief, pain, fear, all tangled together. Daniel rose, scanning again. He knew what had to be done. Stop bleeding, keep airways clear, stabilize fractures, improvised or not. Action was better than waiting. The question was whether he could still do it after years of letting himself rust in isolation. He looked at Atlas, who stood ready, tail stiff, waiting for direction like a soldier awaiting orders. Daniel gave a short nod. All right, partner. Let's get to work. The dog seemed to understand. It padded toward a half-buried backpack, nose digging into the dirt, tugging at the strap until it came free. Inside, a water bottle, a small med kit, scraps of food. Not much, but it was a start. Daniel carried the kit to the nearest injured climber, a woman named Sophie who cradled her shattered arm. He tore strips from his flannel shirt, fashioned a makeshift sling, and murmured steady reassurances even though his hands shook slightly at first. Hold still. You're gonna be all right. Her eyes widened at his calm, and she nodded through gritted teeth. Another cry came from the far side of the slide. A young man, Chris's half-buried legs twisted wrong. Daniel's stomach clenched at the sight, but he moved fast. He used a broken branch as a lever, shifting smaller rocks until Atlas wriggled in beside the boy, licking his face, keeping him conscious. Chris groaned. I can't feel my legs. Daniel pressed a firm hand to his shoulder. Stay with me. That's an order. His tone carried the command of someone used to being obeyed. Chris blinked through pain and clung to the sound like a lifeline. For the next hour, Daniel worked without pause. Pressure bandages from torn clothing, splints from snapped branches, water rationed by mouthfuls. He moved from one climber to the next, his mind in a familiar rhythm he thought he had buried forever. Each task numbed his fear, replacing it with something else: purpose. Atlas never left his side. When Daniel needed light, the dog stood where the fading sun struck. When Daniel needed comfort, Atlas pressed against the injured, radiating warmth. When silence threatened to swallow the survivors, Atlas barked one shop alive, reminding them they were not abandoned. By the time Daniel finally sat back, sweat freezing on his neck, his hands raw, he had stabilized all 8 climbers as best he could, but he knew the truth. This was temporary. Without outside help, most wouldn't survive the night. He glanced up at the ridge, dark clouds curling above the peaks. Night was coming fast. The temperature would drop below freezing. Time was slipping through their fingers. Jason's voice, hoarse but clear, broke the silence. Who are you?" Daniel hesitated. His name felt foreign in his mouth, as if it belonged to another man. But he answered anyway. "Daniel," he said. "Just a man who was in the wrong place at the right time." Atlas barked once, as if correcting him. No, the right place because he came when called. Daniel wiped dirt from his hands, eyes narrowing at the horizon. He had one option left, the old radio in his cabin. If it still worked, if the signal carried, maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. But that meant leaving them even briefly. And leaving was something he hadn't done in years. He looked at Atlas. The dog stared back, steady and unflinching. Daniel exhaled slowly. "Guess it's not just me anymore." And for the first time in nearly a decade, he felt like he was back on mission. Daniel's hands were shaking, not from fear but from the adrenaline flooding his veins. 8 strangers' lives balanced on a knife's edge, and whether he liked it or not, the weight had landed squarely on his shoulders. The scar of the landslide stretched wide before him, an open wound in the side of the mountain. Fallen trees jutted like broken bones, and the air smelled of raw earth and dust. Every cry, every groan from the trapped climbers echoed off the stone walls, magnified by the wilderness. Daniel crouched beside Jason again, scanning the group with eyes trained for assessment. He muttered softly, as if briefing himself. Jason fractured leg, possible internal bleeding. Sophie arm broken, shock setting. In Chris both legs crushed, unconsciousness risk. Nora surface wounds, stable, keeping her calm is key. Ethan shoulder dislocated. David head trauma, need to watch his breathing. Liam sprained ankle, borderline hypothermia. Olivia cuts, dehydration. Still mobile, he drew in a sharp breath. Too many, too severe. His mind, however, didn't falter, locked into triage mode. The weight it had in dust-choked alleys half a world away. Atlas paced the group, sensing their fear. The dog pressed against Jason's chest for warmth, then padded over to Sophie, resting its head gently on her lap. She flinched at first, but then her lips trembled into something close to a smile. "Good boy," she whispered, clutching at his fur as though it tethered her to life. Daniel worked quickly. He tore strips from what remained of his shirt and wrapped Jason's leg tight, fashioning a tourniquet from his belt to stem the bleeding. Jason hissed, knuckles white, but Daniel's voice cut through, steady and low. "Breathe through it, in, out. You've got this. Next, Sophie." He realigned her arm with a practiced snap that made her cry out, then secured it with a branch and sling. He didn't flinch, though the sound of bone grinding stirred memories he wanted buried. Chris was the worst, both legs pinned under a slab of rock, his breathing shallow, face pale as snow. Daniel crouched low, fingers at his neck. The pulse fluttered like a trapped bird. He looked at the rock, at Chris's legs. He knew he couldn't move it without causing more damage. Not alone. He leaned close, whispering firmly, as though speaking to a fellow soldier. "Stay with me, kid. Don't quit on me. You hear me?" Chris groaned, half conscious. Atlas nudged his hand, licking his fingers to keep him present. Daniel turned to Nora, who was kneeling despite blood streaking her face. Her eyes were sharp, steady. She had been talking to the others, calming them, repeating his reassurances. "You're the strong one," Daniel said simply. She blinked, surprised, then nodded. "Tell me what to do. Keep them awake. Talk to them. Don't let anyone drift off." Nora immediately shifted, squeezing Sophie's shoulder, calling Jason's name softly, anchoring them with her presence. "Daniel, if you felt a flicker of gratitude." She reminded him of medics he'd known, ordinary people forced to become extraordinary in chaos. Ethan's shoulder was next. Daniel braced and forced it back into place with a quick motion. Ethan screamed, but within moments his breathing steadied, his face less strained. David worried him most after Chris. A nasty gash ran across the side of his skull. Daniel cleaned it as best he could with torn cloth and water from the salvaged bottle. He tilted David's head gently, watching his breathing. "Stay with us, buddy," he murmured. "Don't you check out on me. Liam sat shivering, teeth chattering, his ankles swollen and useless. Daniel wrapped it, then stripped off his own jacket to cover him. "Atlas," Daniel said quietly, nodding. The dog circled, then curled against Liam's side, radiating warmth. Finally, Olivia. Her injuries were lighter, but her face showed exhaustion, dehydration. Daniel pressed the bottle into her hand. "Small sips," he instructed. She obeyed, nodding, tears spilling silently down her cheeks. Minutes stretched into an hour, and the clearing grew darker as the sun dipped behind jagged peaks. The temperature plummeted. Daniel's breath puffed white in the air, his hands numb and raw. He looked around at the 8 of them, stabilized but fragile. Their survival window was closing. He knew it. They needed extraction, and fast. His gaze drifted to the ridgeline where his cabin lay beyond the trees. The old radio, maybe it still worked. Maybe it could carry far enough to reach a ranger post. He hated the thought of leaving them, but there was no choice. Jason gripped his wrist suddenly, eyes desperate. "Don't leave us, please." Daniel crouched lower, forcing his gaze steady. "I'll come back, but if I don't try, none of you make it through the night. Trust me." Jason's lip trembled, but he nodded. Atlas barked once, sharp. Daniel looked down at him. The dog's amber eyes glinted in the fading light, unwavering, loyal, ready. "You stay," Daniel told him softly. "Guard them." Atlas went low, but then patted back among the injured, lying across 2 sleeping bags they'd half dug out, pressing his warmth against the weakest. His head lifted, ears sharp, watching Daniel go. Daniel rose, scanning the faces one last time. The battlefield had taught him one truth. You never knew if goodbye was final. His chest tightened, but he pushed it down. He turned and began the climb, back toward the ridge, the scar of the landslide stretching below him like a reminder. For years he had tried to bury the soldier in him. Tonight, the mountain had dug him back up, and 8 lives now depended on whether he could still be that man. Daniel's boots crunched against loose stone as he climbed the ridge. Every step away from the injured group tore at him, but his mind replayed the same brutal calculation. Without outside help, they wouldn't survive the night. The cabin wasn't far half a mile through trees and broken trail, but in the darkening cold, it felt endless. His breath came in clouds, his fingers stiff against the strap of the pack he'd salvaged from the debris. Inside was scraps, half-crushed energy, bars, a dented water flask, and a first aid kit that looked like it had seen better decades. Not much, but it was something. He pushed through brush, reached the clearing, and saw the faint outline of his cabin, weathered logs, patched roof, smokestack, cold for weeks. It wasn't home, it never had been, but tonight it might be. There, only lifeline, inside. The air smelled of pine and old ash. He dropped the pack, went straight to the corner where the shortwave radio sat under a tarp. Dust clung to its casing, but it was intact. He connected wires, clicked the crank battery, flipped the switch. A hiss of static filled the room. Daniel leaned in, voice low, but urgent. "This is Daniel Cross, north ridge of the Rockies, near Black Hollow. Multiple climbers injured in a landslide. I need immediate rescue response." Static, then a faint crackle. His pulse jumped. "Copy, this is Helena Ranger Station. Identify condition and location." Over. Relief washed through him. The radio still worked. The world was listening. He pressed the button. 8 climbers. Severe trauma. 1 unconscious with crushed legs. Another with head wound, multiple fractures. Coordinates. He rattled off the grid numbers he knew by heart, drilled into him from years of surviving these mountains. The reply came steadier. Hold position, rescue team, en route ETA. Several hours. Stay on frequency. Over. Another voice. Cutinfemale.com. Professional. This is Clara Hayes. Medical support on channel. Can you hear me? Daniel's throat tightened. For a moment, he wasn't in his cabin. He was back in Afghanistan, headset pressed against his ear, hearing medics guiding him through combat chaos. "Yes," he said, almost a whisper, then firmer. "I hear you." "Good. You're doing well. I'll walk you through stabilizing the group until help arrives. First, hypothermia risk. Keep them warm, especially the ones in shock. Use layers, body heat, anything you have." Daniel glanced at the pile of blankets by the cot. He gathered them, stuffed them in the pack. "Copied that." Her voice stayed steady, clinical but human. "Tell me about the unconscious one." Male, mid-20s, name's Chris, both legs pinned, shallow breathing, weak pulse. Silence for a beat. Then, "Don't move the rocks. He'll bleed out if you do. Keep pressure stable, insulate him, and monitor his breathing. Talk to him, even if he can't respond." Daniel nodded, though she couldn't see. "Understood." "Now, the head injury." "David, gash along the temple, bleeding slowed, but he's drifting in and out. Keep his airway open. Head tilted slightly, apply pressure, but don't let him fall asleep completely. Needs stimulation. Keep him talking. Her instructions came crisp, decisive. They steadied him. They reminded him he wasn't alone. Daniel packed supplies, slung the bag over his shoulder, and turned back toward the ridge. The climb down felt sharper this time, heavier with purpose. When he returned to the clearing, the cold had deepened. His breath fogged in the beam of his flashlight. The climber stirred at his approach. Nora looked up, relief breaking across her exhausted face. You came back. I told you I would. He dropped to his knees beside Jason first, pulling blankets from the bag, layering them over the group. Atlas padded forward, tail low but wagging, eyes locked on Daniel like a soldier awaiting orders. Daniel ruffled his ears briefly. Good job holding the line. The dog pressed closer, as if he understood. One by one, Daniel followed Clara's voice through the speaker, splinting with branches, tightening bandages, shifting positions to ease pressure points. His hands moved with precision, memory guiding them even when strength faltered. The climbers winced, gasped, but each procedure pulled them back from the brink. At Chris's side, Daniel knelt and brushed dirt from the young man's face. Chris, you're not done here. Stay with me. Atlas lay down across Chris's legs. The weight of strange comfort. Chris stirred faintly, lips moving. Daniel bent closer. Hurt, I know, Daniel said softly, but pain means you're alive. Keep feeling it. Don't let go. Ours crawled. Clara's voice cut through the night, steadying him when his focus wavered. She guided him on shock symptoms, circulation checks, fluid intake. Her tone held no panic, only control. It reminded him of voices he hadn't heard in years, the ones that had anchored him in war zones where chaos reigned. Between treatments, Daniel checked his watch, tracking minutes against the cold. He fought fatigues creeping into his bones. Every groan, every breath from the climbers became his mission. He wasn't supposed to be here. He wasn't supposed to be this man anymore. But the mountain didn't care. The mountain had called him back near midnight. Ethan stirred, his voice cracked. Why are you doing this? Daniel paused, bandage in hand. For a long moment, he didn't answer. Then, quietly, because someone has to. Atlas shifted closer, resting his head on Daniel's boot. Amber eyes glowing in the firelight of their makeshift camp. In that look, Daniel saw no judgment, only loyalty, a silent promise. They weren't alone. The hours ahead would be long, brutal, uncertain. But as the radio crackled with Clara's guidance and the dog lay warm beside them, Daniel felt something stir in his chest that had been absent for years. Not hope exactly, but something close. And for the first time in a long time, he welcomed the weight of responsibility pressing on his shoulders. The night deepened into something heavier than Highlands. The mountain air bit like broken glass, and every gust carried the groan of shifting rock, as if the ridge still hadn't made up its mind about staying put. Daniel sat by the dim lantern, eyes scanning the circle of injured climbers. Most had drifted into shallow, uneasy sleep. Tyson muttered now and then, feverish. David groaned when the cold cut too deep. Chris, the one pinned under stone, clung to life with breaths so faint, Daniel sometimes leaned close to feel them against his cheek. Atlas didn't sleep. The dog prowled the perimeter, circling back to nose at the weakest, then staring into the dark tree line as if daring the mountain itself to try again. Daniel's radio crackled. Clara's voice bled through the static, steady, unshaken. Cross, you still with me? He pressed the button, thumb stiff from the cold. Still here. Good. Keep talking. Exhaustion creeps faster when you're silent. Her tone wasn't just professional. It carried warmth, a medic's trick, he thought. But still, it landed. Deeper than he expected. He leaned back against a rock, shifting the weight off his sore knees. They're stable as they can be. You said rescue would take hours. Correct. We've got a snowcat moving in, but terrain is rough. Dawn's the earliest we can hope for. Dawn. Daniel's eyes flicked to the horizon, black as pitch, hours away. He thought of the weight pressing on Chris's chest, of hypothermia sneaking into their bones, and of how long human will could last in conditions like this. Tell me something, Clara said suddenly, breaking into his spiral. He frowned. Like what? Anything. Keep your mind awake. Tell me why a man like you's alone in a cabin out here instead of in town with the rest of us. Daniel froze. The question was harmless on the surface, but it hit like a tripwire. He stared at the climbers, their pale faces glowing in the lantern light. He thought about lying, about offering some easy answer. But the mountain didn't let you fake things. Not here, my wife, he said finally. The words caught in his throat, but he forced them out. She was a medic too, overseas. We didn't both come back. Static hummed. For a long moment. Clara didn't speak, then softly. I'm sorry. Daniel swallowed. Jaw tight. I told myself I was done fighting, done saving people who wandered into chaos. But here I am again, doing it anyway. You didn't choose the mountain, Clara said, but you did choose them. He looked down at Jason, the feverish one. Then at Nora, who clutched her brother's hand in restless sleep. He remembered the hollow years' days of chopping wood, fixing roofs, walking trails alone. Pretending solitude was peace. Maybe Clara was right. Maybe tonight he had chosen. The radio hissed again. Clara's voice returned. Steadier now. Tell me about your dog. Daniel almost laughed. Atlas, he's smarter than half the soldiers I served with. Trained him myself when I thought I'd go back into security work. Turns out, he's better at keeping me alive than I am at keeping him fed. Across the fire, Atlas raised his head as if he knew he was being talked about. His eyes glowed gold in the dim light, scanning the dark like sentinels. Clara chuckled faintly through the radio. Good name. Atlas carries the world, doesn't he? Daniel's lips curved into something that almost resembled a smile. Yeah, seems fitting tonight. The climate stirred, breaking the fragile moment. Daniel shifted back into soldier mode, checking pulses, adjusting splints, coaxing water into cracked lips. Each move was precise, efficient, and each time his hands faltered. Clara's voice anchored him. I was blurred. Daniel spoke more than he had in years, stories of deserts and firefights, of comrades lost and few saved. Clara didn't push, didn't pry. She just listened, occasionally guiding him back to medical checks or nudging him away from silence. At one point, while adjusting Chris's blanket, Daniel whispered, I lost men with better chances than this. Don't let me lose him to Clarice. The reply was gentle but firm. You're not alone out there, Daniel. Every breath he takes now is because of you. Hold that line. Dawn is coming. Something inside him cracked, then not broken, but shifted. For the first time since his wife's death, he felt the weight of another voice walking beside him in the dark. Atlas settled at his side, head resting on Daniel's thigh. The fire sputtered low. Daniel leaned back against the stone, exhaustion dragging at him. But his grip on the radio never loosened. When Clara spoke again, her tone softened further, almost personal. Crossed. Yeah, you said you were done saving people. Maybe that's what you told yourself. But looking at you now, I don't believe it. He stared into the flames. Their glow reflected in his tired eyes. His voice was rough, quiet. Neither do I. The mountain groaned. The night pressed in. But for the first time in years, Daniel didn't feel entirely alone in the fight. Dawn was still hours away, but in the voice on the radio, and the steady warmth of the dog at his side, he found enough to carry him through the dark. The fire had burned down to a weak glow. Sparks rose and vanished in the endless dark, swallowed by the mountain wind. Daniel sat hunched forward, arms wrapped tight around himself, his breath fogging in the icy air. The cold wasn't just biting anymore, it was digging in, gnawing at joints and marrow, making every movement stiff and heavy. Atlas shifted closer to the wounded climber, lying across Jason's legs to share warmth. The dog's steady breathing was the only rhythm left. Against the storm of silence, Daniel checked each survivor again. Sophie's lips were blue, her pulse thready. David had slipped into a shallow, restless sleep, sweat frosting against his brow despite the freezing temperature. Crystal pinned beneath stone groaned weakly, his chest rising with painful effort. The radio hissed alive. Clara's voice broke through the static. Cross, give me a status update. Daniel pressed the transmitter, his fingers nearly numb. They're fading. Hypothermia's hitting them hard. Chris. He paused, looking down at the man. I don't know how much longer he can hold out. There was a beat of silence on the line. Then Clara's voice returned, calm, professional, but warmer now. Listen carefully. We're still hours out. You need to buy them time. Start with Sophie, get her core temperature up. Use body heat if you have to. Daniel blinked at the words. He'd done it before, in deserts and snowfields, but always with soldiers' brothers who understood what survival meant. Now it was strangers, innocent climbers who had never asked for war. He unzipped his jacket, pulled Sophie close, and held her against his chest. She stirred faintly, whispering something he couldn't catch. You're okay, Daniel murmured, more to himself than to her. Stay with me. Atlas shifted again, pressing against Chris's side. The body trembled, but he refused to move. Minutes bled into an hour. Daniel rotated between the survivors, sharing warmth, adjusting makeshift splints, forcing sips of water. His body screamed for rest, but the soldier in him knew better. Rest meant death, for him and for them. Suddenly, the mountain groaned. A distant rumble rolled down the valley. Stones clattered somewhere in the dark. Daniel froze, listening. The ground shuddered, just enough to spill loose gravel down the slope. The climbers stirred, eyes wide with terror even in their weakness. Aftershock, Daniel muttered. He gripped the radio. Clara, we might have more rock coming down. Static. Then her voice, steady, but urgent, stay alert. If it shifts again, you need to move them, even if it's just a few feet. Daniel clenched his jaw. Move them. Half of them could barely breathe, let alone crawl. And Chris, if he tried to drag Chris out from under the rock, the man might bleed out on the spot. His mind spun back to Afghanistan nights under mortar fire, pulling bodies through sand, choosing who lived and who didn't. The memory sliced open scars he thought had gone numb. Not again. Not tonight. He shook it off and got to work. He reinforced the tops, shifted debris to form a crude barrier against falling rock, and dragged two of the lighter climbers a few feet toward a more sheltered ridge. His muscles screamed, breath ragged, but he kept going. Clara's voice cut through the darkness. You're holding the line, Daniel. You've done this before. He almost laughed. I'm too old for this. You're exactly the age they need. Experienced, steady, the kind who doesn't break when the night tries to. Daniel pressed his forehead to the cold stone for a second, letting her words settle. He hadn't realized how much he needed to hear them, not from a commander, not from an old comrade, but from someone who believed in him tonight. Jason stirred, fevered, and confused. We're not gonna make it. Daniel knelt, gripping the boy's shoulder. You will. You hear, mate. You all will. You just hold on until morning. The boy's eyes flooded shut, but the faintest nod followed. Time stretched cruelly. Daniel's hands went numb. His lips cracked, but he kept moving, kept checking pulses, kept speaking to Clara, through the radio. Her voice guided him through improvised treatment, massaging circulation back into limbs, wrapping survivors tighter, pacing, breathing with Chris to keep his lungs working. At one point, Clara asked quietly, Daniel, when was the last time you slept? He glanced at the dark sky, then at the pale faces around him. Doesn't matter, answer me, he sighed. 2 nights, maybe 3. Then hear this. The mountain wants you exhausted. That's how it wins. You can't let it talk. To me. Tell me something that keeps you awake. Daniel stared into the weak fire, fighting the pull of fatigue. Memories surfaced: his wife's laugh, the weight of a hand on his shoulder, the way she patched him up after missions like this. He almost couldn't speak, but then he said, voice low, she'd tell me to keep moving. She always did. Clara's reply was soft, almost personal. Then do it for her. The night dragged on, the cold sharpened, cruel and relentless. But Daniel didn't falter. With Atlas pressed close, with Clara's voice steady in his ear, and with the faint but stubborn heartbeat of every survivor under his watch, he fought the mountain hour by hour. And as the horizon finally hinted at pale gray, just the first whisper of dawn, Daniel realized something he hadn't dared in years. He wanted them to live, not just because it was his duty, but because maybe saving them meant saving a part of himself too. The first light crept over the jagged horizon, turning the snow-dusted peaks of the Rockies into sharp silhouettes. The long night had broken. Daniel sat slumped against a boulder, eyes heavy, body trembling from exhaustion. His breath came in shallow clouds. Every muscle ached from hours of lifting, carrying, pressing life back into failing bodies. He hadn't closed his eyes once. He couldn't. Atlas stirred beside him, tail slicking weakly against the frozen ground. The dog's fur was frosted with ice. His body pressed tight against Chris's chest all night, keeping him alive by sheer instinct. Atlas raised his head now, ears pricking. Then it came, the faintest thump, carried on the morning air. Once, twice, rhythmic, a sound Daniel hadn't expected to hear again in his lifetime. Rotor blades. He blinked, forcing himself upright. The radio crackled alive. Clara's voice, bright now, filled the silence. Daniel, we've got eyes on your position. Just hang on a little longer. We're almost there. For a second, he almost laughed. His chest hurt from holding in that relief. He turned toward the survivors. Some were still unconscious, others barely clinging. Jason opened his eyes, dazed and hollow. You hear that? Daniel asked, his voice rough but certain. That's for you. You're going home. Tears welled in Sophie's eyes. Nora gripped his hand, whispering something that sounded like thank you but broke off into a cough. The thump of blades grew louder. Snow whipped into the air as a rescue helicopter crested the ridge, flares of sunlight glinting off its body. Behind it, smaller figures appeared, rescue climbers making their way fast, their jackets bright red against the gray stone. Atlas barked, a sharp, joyous sound that echoed across the valley. Daniel staggered to his feet, his knees nearly gave, but he steadied himself. He raised the emergency flare he'd held onto all night and cracked it. A red flame hissed to life, smoke curling skyward. The rescuers soared instantly. One waved, signaling. Another shouted into his radio. The helicopter circled, then lowered toward a clearing further down. Clara's voice came through again, closer now, almost in his ear. "I see you, Daniel. I'm with the ground team. We're minutes away." He let the radio fall against his chest, relief heavier than any fatigue. For the first time in years, he let himself believe he wasn't alone. Minutes stretched, but the rescuers finally reached them. Bright helmets, firm hands, efficient movements. They assessed the climbers, applied real bandages where Daniel had used strips of cloth, checked vitals with equipment he hadn't seen in years. Clara was among them. She pushed through the chaos, her breath visible in the cold air, eyes scanning until they landed on him. For a moment, Daniel froze. He had built her voice in his head all night, a steady lifeline through the dark. Seeing her now, a real person, flushed with effort but steady, determined, felt like stepping into sunlight after years of shadows. "Daniel Cross," she asked, breathless. He nodded. "That's me." Her eyes softened. "You did it. You kept them alive." He shook his head. "Atlas did most of the work," as if on cue. Atlas trotted up, tail wagging weakly, pressing his muzzle against Clara's hand. She smiled, stroking the dog's head. "Looks like you both did." The helicopter roared overhead, lowering rescue baskets one by one. The climbers were lifted, their pale faces easing as medics reassured them. Jason, his legs strapped tight, grabbed Daniel's wrist before being pulled up. "If it wasn't for you," Jason whispered hoarsely, "we'd be gone." Daniel squeezed his hand, unable to find words. He just nodded. Chris was lifted next, Atlas pacing until he was secure, then barking once as if to say, "Watch him." Finally, the last climber disappeared into the helicopter. The sound of its blades carried over the mountains like a heartbeat. Daniel stood there swaying from fatigue. As the team gathered their gear, Clara remained, looking at him with quiet intensity. "You coming down with us?" she asked. He looked back toward his cabin, hidden beyond the trees. For years, it had been his world for walls of silence, a prison he convinced himself with safety. Now, after one night of fire, blood, and voices over the radio, it felt smaller than ever. He hesitated. "Not sure I belong down there anymore." Clara stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You kept 8 strangers alive through a night that should have killed them. You belong exactly where people need you. Don't let the mountain lie to you." Daniel, the words struck deep. He looked at Atlas, who tilted his head, ears pricked, waiting. The soldier in him, the one he thought had died with his wife, was still there, beaten, scarred, but alive. Daniel finally exhaled. "Yeah," he said softly. "Maybe I do." Atlas barked once, as if sealing the decision. Together, they turned toward the waiting team, toward the helicopter, toward the world beyond the ridge. And as the sun climbed higher, spilling gold across the snow and stone, Daniel felt something stir in his chest. Not relief, not even pride, hope. For the first time in years, he carried it with him as he stepped out of the night. The valley was quiet now. The roar of the helicopter had faded into the morning sky, leaving only the hush of wind through the pines. The mountain looked unchanged, its slopes still cloaked in gold from the rising sun, but for Daniel, everything was different. He stood on the ridge with Atlas at his side, watching the rescue team pack the last of their gear. The climbers were gone, lifted away to hospitals in safety. For the first time since the landslide, silence returned, but it wasn't the heavy, suffocating silence of his cabin. This was different. This silence carried weight, meaning. Clara moved closer, pulling her hood down, her hair whipped in the wind, strands catching the light. She studied him for a moment, her eyes searching. "You're not used to people thanking you, are you?" she said softly. Daniel shrugged. "Not anymore. Been a long time." "You saved 8 lives last night," she reminded him. "Most people never even get the chance to save one. That matters." He wanted to argue, to push it away like he always did, but he couldn't. Not after Jason's words. Not after seeing Chris breathe again. Not after Sophie's tears of relief. "It doesn't erase anything," Daniel said finally. "It's past, it doesn't go away." Clara nodded. "No, it doesn't. But it doesn't have to trap you either. You've been carrying ghosts so long you forgot you're still alive." Atlas nudged his leg, then, pressing his head firmly against him. The dog's amber eyes locked onto his, steady and unflinching. Daniel reached down, scratching behind his ears. Somehow, in that simple gesture, the truth sank in. For years, he had convinced himself isolation was penance, that hiding in the cabin, cutting himself off, was the only way to live with the guilt of surviving when others hadn't. But last night proved something different. Survival wasn't the end of his story. It was the beginning of another. He looked out across the ridgeline. The world stretched wide, valleys deep with pines, snowcaps blazing under the rising sun. He had lived here for years, yet only now did it look alive again. "Clara," he said quietly, "I don't know what's next, but maybe I don't have to know yet." She smiled. "Small, but certain, that's the point. You don't have to have it all figured out. Just don't shut the door on the world anymore. Let people in. Let life in." Her words were gentle, but they struck him harder than any battlefield order ever had. Atlas barked once, sharp and insistent. As if echoing her, the dog trotted a few steps ahead, turning back to make sure they followed. Clara laughed. "Looks like he's already decided for you." Daniel shook his head, smiling despite himself. "Yeah, he always was the stubborn one." They walked down the trail together, the air crisp and clean, the smell of pine thick in their lungs. For the first time in years, Daniel didn't feel like he was walking back into solitude. He was walking forward into something new. At the base of the ridge, the rescue team waited, but no one rushed him. They seemed to sense this was a moment worth letting play out. Clara adjusted her pack, glanced at him once more. "You ever think about coming back?" she asked. Daniel frowned. "Back. To people, to purpose. You still have a lot to give, Daniel, maybe more than you realize." The words lingered. He didn't answer right away, but he didn't dismiss them either, and that silence was enough. Atlas circled around him, tail wagging, eyes bright. The dog's loyalty was absolute, his presence a reminder that even in the darkest corners of the wilderness, bonds could form, lives could change. Daniel looked up at the mountain one last time. The peak glowed in the dawn, the sky burning with pink and gold. For years, he had seen it only as a wall, something to hide beneath, but now it looked like a gateway. He exhaled, the cold air filling his chest. "Maybe it's time," he whispered, not to Clara, not to Atlas, not even to the mountain, just to himself. And for the first time, the words felt true. The three of them, Soldier, Gila, and Guardian, turned toward the trail, the sun at their backs, the world waiting ahead. The mountain would always whisper, but Daniel no longer feared its voice. He had found his own again, as they disappeared into the forest. The ridge behind them bathed in morning light. The story of that night became part of the mountain's silence, one more secret held in stone and snow. But for Daniel, it wasn't the end, it was the beginning.